So I got this question from a subscriber recently, and honestly, it's something I've thought a lot about, but at the same time, I've been putting off talking about it because mainly it's a little bit of a controversial topic, and I typically don't get my kicks out of discussing topics like this, but I do feel like I have quite a unique perspective from living and traveling in China for the last year and a half, and since the question came from one of my awesome members, I decided to answer it today. They asked, what is the difference between the Australian media propaganda about China and the real China with your own eyes? What about the cultural shocks since you came to China? Now, this is a bit of a tricky topic because China is massive, and people's experiences here are totally different depending on where they go and what they do. So I can't speak for everyone, but today I want to share how my perspective has changed since living here, what has surprised me, what was different from what I expected based on what is shown in the media, and also share some of the cultural shocks I've had along the way. Before I moved here, my view of China was mostly shaped by what I saw in the news, on social media, and in general public discussions back in Australia. And to be fair, a lot of that coverage was pretty one-dimensional. Mostly political stories, trade wars, human rights discussions, and occasionally some crazy videos of extreme pollution or some huge crowds in some of the major cities. So naturally, I had some assumptions before coming here. But when I finally got here, one of the things I realized was just how normal life is here. It's not this super restrictive, high tension, overcrowded, loud, noisy place, although it can be overcrowded at times. People are just living their lives, working, eating out, spending time with family, scrolling their phones, shopping, traveling, the same stuff people do everywhere. And people actually seem pretty happy with their lives here. Another thing that hit me was the sheer convenience of everything. Mobile payments, high-speed trains, food delivery, it is actually just on another level here. I can go weeks without using cash. In fact, I don't remember the last time I used cash here. Nowadays, I just use my hand to pay for things, which is something I never saw coming, but is super convenient. You don't even need to bring your phone anywhere anymore. I can book a cross-country train ticket in seconds for a pretty reasonable price, and it will get me there extremely fast because they're all bullet trains here in China. If I order food, it's at my door in like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Living here is definitely very, very convenient, or at least more convenient than I had expected. And then the final thing that I realized since coming here is regarding the kind of social atmosphere that they have here in China. I was expecting a much more closed off society, but people are super friendly, especially if you show interest in their culture. Their culture really resonates for me. Like, you can just go to a different province and they have completely different ethnic minorities. They have different languages. They have different architecture, completely different food. Like, it is so interesting to me. And if you take an interest in that culture, they are more than willing to introduce you to the culture, take you into their home, invite you to their villages. In my previous video, a guy just invited me to his village to experience quite a personal and important holiday, the Dragon Lantern Festival, with him, and he was so kind and so warm-hearted. And yeah, I really didn't expect them to be that open and willing to share their culture with foreigners. So that is definitely something that surprised me when I came here. Of course, there have been things that took some getting used to. One of the biggest differences since I've been here has been the balance between safety and privacy. China does feel incredibly safe. Like, I can walk around at night in almost any city without worrying. Like, there's cameras everywhere. People generally look out for each other. Like, I'll be working in a coffee shop, I'll just leave my laptop there, I'll go out and get some food, come back. Like, I never even think about it anymore, which could be a bit of a downside if I want to go travel anywhere else in the world. I need to kind of readjust my my safety sort of gauge. But at the same time, there is a lot of surveillance here, there's a lot of digital tracking, and it's much more present here than it is in Australia. Although people here don't seem to mind as much because it makes life more convenient and safe. But coming from a more privacy-focused society, being Australia and the West in general, it definitely took some time to adjust. Another thing that surprised me was just how much more of a collectivist mindset the culture is here in China. In Australia, we have a quite large emphasis on being independent, moving out when you're a little bit younger, making your own way, being self-reliant. But in China, it seems like the focus is more on family and community, and that plays a much more bigger role. Parents often live with their kids, it seems. Family decisions, I think, are often made as a bit of a unit instead of just an individual. Say if you're selecting where you want to go live, family plays a much more of a bigger role. Although there are a lot of people who move to cities in search of work and then send money back home to their families. I know that does happen a lot. But it seems in general there's like quite a strong responsibility or sense of responsibility to take care of the group instead of just the individual. That being said, since doing some long trips in China, I can say that the collectivism mindset doesn't quite extend to the driving culture. Here in China, give way doesn't really exist, and cutting people off is just the way it's done here. If you want to cross at a crosswalk, you have to simply go. Just hope that someone's going to stop for you. And it kind of seems like it's a bit of every man for themselves mindset when you're on the road. Although that might just be due to the sheer population of people here, and if you don't go and cut someone off, then you'll just never ever get to your destination because you'll just be letting people in all the time. There might be that mentality to it. So that was definitely another thing that I had to get used to, but I feel like I've adjusted quite well to that. I am cutting people off right, left and center when I drive now. But there is actually one thing to be said about that. There is much less road rage here than back in Australia. If you cut someone off in Australia, they will be up your ass and flashing their lights and honking you for like the next kilometer or two. But here in China, it's just so common to do that people just don't mind. Like no one gets angry. It's just assumed that that's the way everyone's going to do it. So yeah, I found that quite interesting as well. The final cultural difference that I found here is that people are much more direct when it comes to certain topics. Within the first minute of meeting people, usually cab drivers, meeting people on the street and stuff, they often won't ask these questions, but cab drivers just seem to be very, very direct in the way that they talk to you, and they will often ask about my salary, how much money I make, or how much money I made when I was in Australia, whether I'm married, whether I have a girlfriend. Some of them might even ask about my weight, my eating habits, that sort of thing. But obviously in Western culture, that's not, that seems quite invasive to ask those sorts of questions, so that's not typically done. But here it's just simply small talk for some people, and I am completely used to it now. But when I first got here, it was a little bit of a cultural shock, so to speak. But at the same time, it's kind of funny because when it comes to like business discussions or serious discussions about contracts or working together, the language here can be quite indirect, actually. People don't typically say what they mean straight off the bat. Like I don't think it's quite, unless you're bargaining with someone on the street. There you might say, "Oh, the price is way too much." But here, I think in a business context, it's more indirect, the language. They won't just come straight out and say, "That is too expensive, bring it down." It'll be some sort of roundabout way that they might insinuate that something is a little bit too much, like the price is a little bit too much for them to handle or something. So it's an interesting kind of contrast between those two situations here in China. Now, does all this mean that Western media has been completely wrong about China in all of its coverage all the time? I cannot say that for sure, but I do think that the focus tends to be more on political and economic issues rather than like just the day-to-day life that most people here actually experience. On the flip side, Chinese media obviously has its own narratives as well. I think there are plenty of things that aren't covered in depth here either. No country's media is 100% objective. I feel like biases are always going to show through. That's just human nature. There's always different angles and perspectives. But what I've learned in China so far is that this country is way too big, too diverse, too complex to fit into a single headline. And the reality is that the only true way to understand a place is to go there yourself, meet the people and see how life actually works on the ground. So I'm curious, if you have been to China, what surprised you the most? And if you haven't, what's something that you'd love to learn more about? Drop me a comment below and maybe I'll cover it in a future video. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, consider joining as a member to support the channel. I would really appreciate it. And you will get access to more discussions like this. And until then, I will see you in the next video.